Welcome to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show with Corey and Justin. Here they are, the Fourth and Long Fantasy Brothers.
Welcome in to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. My name is Justin, and I'm here with my actual brother, Corey.
Hey, this is Corey.
Corey and I are switching roles today. I'll be hosting as we're going to be diving into Corey's first batch of fantasy football rankings for this upcoming season. I'm excited, man. Corey, before we get into things today, I found myself in bed last night scrolling through the never-ending black hole that is Twitter for my fantasy football fix before bed. The drumbeat is starting to pick up here, and the news cycle is gaining more and more momentum. This time of year, we hear about guys like Keelan Cole running with the ones, how Antonio Gibson is going to catch 80 passes, and the hundreds of OTA and minicamp videos of guys running without pads and looking like the next great fantasy football star. Do you have any advice for our audience as they navigate the complicated space that is the OTA, minicamp, and training camp news cycle?
Yeah. Well, Justin, I got to say, as much as I'm going to sound like a hypocrite here, I want to start by saying that I've been in that black hole before, and it's not a fun place to be. I feel awful after doing it. And the reason why I feel awful is because really we should avoid it. I feel like for the most part, I feel like injuries are important news to sort of keep in mind, especially these early on injuries can linger, especially if there's something that has to do with a player's ability to do whatever they're expected to do on the field, quarterbacks if they can throw, running backs, wide receivers if they can run or if they can catch. But really, when it comes down to it, I think a lot of this is just noise. Shockingly, a lot of coaches aren't going to tell us the truth, especially in this situation where they're still evaluating their talent. So I take it all with a grain of salt, Justin, and I don't take it all too seriously. There's nuggets of good information out there. This is where you get to learn about things like Darren Waller, because we were hearing great things about Darren Waller before he really broke out a couple of years ago. So this stuff really does kind of have its value, but only in short doses, in my opinion.
If you find yourself navigating down that black hole that is the OTA, minicamp, training camp, news cycle here, you're in a safe place, folks. Come back, listen to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. We'll dissect it all for you and try to steer you in the right direction.
Right. Well, Justin, I just want to say we're not going to dissect too much because I think we know not to pay attention too much, at least this early on, to a lot of the noise, because that's what it is. It's a lot of noise, right?
Yeah, Corey, you're right. You take everything with a grain of salt here. Most of the stuff you're hearing these days is not going to come to fruition. You navigate it best you can and learn and adapt. So totally agree.
Yeah, but Justin, it's not a waste of time at this time of the year is to get into our rankings. And I know you want to dig into mine. You've got some problems. You've got some questions. So let's talk about it. Let's move forward.
Yeah, man. Let's get to it.
On today's show.
All right, so as we mentioned at the onset of the show, today we're going to be diving into Corey's first pass of fantasy football rankings for the 2021 season. We're going to go through quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends here, dissect the rankings. I want to call out a couple guys here as we go through each position that I got to question Corey on because he's a little off on the ECR and the ADP for most of these players here. And I want to call them out on some of those. So I'm going to start with quarterback here, Corey. Let's get started with one of the more important positions in fantasy football. No surprises here at number one on your rankings list, Pat Mahomes. The next group of guys you have in this second tier, which, again, I like the idea of tiering players when it comes to rankings. I think it makes a lot of sense instead of just numbering guys 1 through 30 or 40. It does make sense to tier these guys out. Can help break tiebreakers in some situations when it does come to draft season. In your next tier here, you actually have Russell Wilson at number 2, Deshaun Watson at 3, Kyler Murray at 4, Lamar Jackson at 5, Josh Allen at 6, Aaron Rodgers at 7, and Justin Herbert at 8, rounding out this second tier of quarterbacks. Corey, I wanted to go back to number 2 here. Russell Wilson, little higher than him on the consensus right now. What makes Russell Wilson your number 2 quarterback?
Yeah, so let me just say, Justin, too, a good thing with me in terms of tiers is I label mine elite, studs, good, risk, and stay away. And so those are the 5 different tiers that I have with every single position. And so really when you're talking about a single tier where so Wilson is the top of the studs for me, which goes down to Herbert, I really have no problem with any of these guys going number 2. Honestly, I truly don't. I can see the reasoning with all of them. It's fantasy football. It's just meant to be fun. Russell Wilson is my 2 because we just continue to doubt this guy year in and year out. And those who doubt him often end up regretting it because he always turns out to be a top 5 quarterback. I know it can sometimes be a bumpy ride where like Wilson's end of the season last year was bumpy, but his beginning was absolutely beautiful. And it's been the other way where he's had a rough start and a really good finish. And sometimes he's been consistent the whole year. And sometimes it's been a roller coaster like last year. So I just really like him as a quarterback. I still think he's probably one of the top 3 or top 4 most talented quarterbacks in football. He's got a really good receiving core. And honestly, they didn't do a whole lot that made me convinced that they are going to go away from the passing game. I know those were the early rumblings from that, that rumor mill talk that we talked about earlier in the episode. I just truly believe that when you take away all the noise and you take away all the situations, Russell Wilson in the situation that he's in Seattle is worth taking with your number 2 quarterback. Now, fair warning, when it comes to quarterbacks, I'll take Mahomes prior to the 5th or 6th round ending. But when it comes to anyone else, you're really not going to see me taking a quarterback probably until the 8th, if not 9th round. And that's when I'll start drafting these studs. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying take Russell Wilson in like the 3rd round or the 4th round. I'm saying Russell Wilson should be that first guy off your board if Mahomes is gone.
Let's move into your good tier, Corey, here. Your next 3 guys, you got quarterback 9 being Dak Prescott, quarterback 10, Matt Stafford, and quarterback 11, Tom Brady. Interesting that you have Dak Prescott here in this good tier. Most experts right now these days have Dak Prescott up in that top 5 in that stud tier where you've got those other quarterbacks. I'm curious, Corey, why is Dak Prescott all the way down here at 9?
Yeah, because prior to 4 or 5 games last year, everyone thought Dak Prescott was just a good quarterback and not a stud. Then he has 4 or 5, I'm not going to lie, really impressive football games. And now all of a sudden he's a stud on everybody's radar. Some would even say he's fantasy elite. And I just think that's jumping the gun. I think this is a situation, you're going to hear me say this a lot today. I zig when others zag. I look at talent. I try to look at players that I like, and I judge them accordingly. I often don't look at expert consensus ranking when I'm making these ranks. I look at all 32 NFL football teams, and I look at who's sort of starter worthy in my mind. And I go through it, and I just sort of plop them down in that way. I try to go without influence, and when I go without influence, Dak Prescott is a good quarterback, not a stud in my mind.
Don't blame me, Corey, and I don't hate the logic there either. Let's move into your next tier here. QB12 is Joe Burrow. You've then got Ryan Fitzpatrick, Ryan Tannehill, Matt Ryan, Daniel Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, Ben Roethlisberger, Carson Wentz, Jameis Winston, and Trevor Lawrence to wrap up your risk tier here. Corey, I'm curious, any of these guys you could see potentially emerging into that good or even stud tier after the season?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that easily could happen with a number of these guys, which is why they're risk. But the thing is when you're talking about the risk category, about 80% of these guys are going to either stay in this category or fall below it. But if you're telling me to pick a couple guys who I think can exceed the expectations, Ryan Fitzpatrick sticks out to me, not for the long term, but at least for the season. Joe Burrow seems like he could make a long-term jump up into the good or stud category. Other than that, I'm not really going to plant my flag in anybody else. But those 2 guys stick out to me as guys who could potentially overperform where I have them ranked right now.
I think the Cincinnati offense will be pretty fun to own, man. I don't blame you. I think that's a good call. All right, let's move into running backs, arguably one of the most important positions in fantasy football. That elite tier of running backs is certainly hard to come by. When you have one of those guys, you certainly have the upper leg on your opponent. Let's start with the top 4 here, Corey, in your elite tier. Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, and Saquon Barkley. Nothing to see there. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think you could interchange any of them in that top 4, and you wouldn't get much opposition from me or most of the experts. In your next tier, your stud tier, starting at RB5, you got Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon at RB9, and then Ezekiel Elliott at RB10. Corey, I'm curious, Zeke Elliott all the way down at RB10. What's the ranking there for?
Well, keep in mind, he's still an RB1, and he's a part of the stud tier, which ranges from 5 to 10 in my mind. So really, I'm not going to argue with you if the idea is he needs to be at 5 or he needs to be at 6, because I can definitely go with the logic of he deserves to move up. But for me, he's the lowest on this stud list because I think he carries more risk than people are giving him credit for. He was mostly healthy last year, and after Dak went down, he was underwhelming. And he just wasn't underwhelming in the stats side of thing, but he looked a little underwhelming. Now, I know people will say that you can't overemphasize what Pollard did as the backup in Dallas last year, because he looked so good when he came on the field. A lot of people will say, well, yeah, he looked so good because he was on the field so little. He had, more opportunities. People thought they were probably throwing when Pollard was on there. And those just sound like excuses to me. The thing is Ezekiel Elliott is starting to show the signs that I personally experienced with the guys like Todd Gurley, Devontae Freeman, those guys who were really, really strong fantasy running backs who started to show a little bit before they absolutely fell off a cliff. Now, I'm still ranking Ezekiel Elliott as an RB1. He's still a stud in my mind. So do I think he's going to fall off a cliff? No, but I think there's a possibility there, and that's why he's my number 10 running back.
I like the logic there, Corey. Just a reminder for our audience, Zeke Elliott was a top 5 running back before Dak Prescott got hurt last year. Could see a lot of the same this season. Let's move into your good tier here, Corey. Starting at RB11, you've got Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You've got Najee Harris coming in at 12. And then I wanted to pause here at 13, 14, and 15. A couple second-year running backs in Antonio Gibson, DeAndre Swift, and Cam Akers. Corey, Akers all the way down at 15. You've got them in this order of Gibson, Swift, Akers. I was curious, what makes you put Gibson ahead when most experts have Akers as the number 1 in this group?
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely go through that. So I would say this to start. When it comes to Gibson, Swift, and Akers, the talent I liked watching the most last year was Antonio Gibson. So these guys are all in the same tier. They're all in that same good tier. And I'm not going to fight you again if you say that Akers needs to go above. But in my personal opinion, I think Gibson has the highest ceiling amongst these guys just based on what I saw. After that, it comes down to situation between Swift and Akers. And I honestly feel like Swift's situation is probably a bit better. If you look at just the roster construction, you're looking at a team that is probably going to be run heavy. And even if it's not going to be a great offense, a guy that's going to get possibly somewhere around 20 to 25 touches is a really intriguing option. Now, I know there's a backup there in Jamal Williams who could potentially take touches away, but I do like what DeAndre Swift can do, and I like what he offers, especially as a high upside play. And then it goes Cam Akers. Now, Cam Akers is, I think, a really good bet this year. I think he's got a really, really nice floor, but I think some people are maybe overstating what he can do. With all of these guys, honestly, Justin, we're banking off of like 6 or 7 weeks last year, and we're trying to project forward based on 6 or 7 weeks. And I've done that in the past, and you know that, Justin, and it's bit me so many times. Jeremy Hill, CJ Spiller, these are guys who I've invested in after watching them for 6 weeks in the previous year, and it's just not a huge sample size to evaluate talent. So when it comes to those situations, when it comes to those guys, they all had areas last year where you were getting really concerned about what they could potentially be, with the exception of Gibson, really. Swift and Akers both had times in the season where it was like, ooh, are you guys actually going to end up becoming something? They eventually did. But I think it's really easy to have that recency bias there. So I like them all. I think they're good bets this year for fantasy. That's just the order that I would go in.
Gibson, the converted wide receiver out of Memphis. I think he's got some real growth to do here in his second season. I could see Gibson potentially emerging into that RB1 range. I like the call, Corey. Let's keep it going here. Your RB16, Josh Jacobs. Then we get into Austin Ekeler, Miles Sanders, Chris Carson, J.K. Dobbins, David Montgomery, Kareem Hunt, James Robinson. And I wanted to pause here at your RB24, and that's Ronald Jones, Corey. I know you're a big Rojo guy. Why don't you give the audience the argument for Ronald Jones, Corey, during the 2021 season?
Yeah, I don't think I've been very, very shy, Justin, about my admiration for what Ronald Jones could be as a runner. Now, he's disappointed in certain circles, but he's also been really, really good in certain circles. And I'd like to recommend to anyone who wants to watch it, we have a Ronald Jones film episode out there about just how I really, really do like a lot of the things he brings to the table. Purely, this is a talent thing, Justin. And I know I've planted my flag on Ronald Jones many times before, and I'm planting it on him again. I don't think this is an unrealistic rank. I think a low-end RB2 is where it's at with Ronald Jones. I am definitely projecting forward. I don't think Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones are similar running backs. I don't think they're on the same level or same tier when it comes to running back talent. Ronald Jones is just a better runner at this point in his career, and I really like what he can do. That Tampa Bay offense really got their wheels underneath them right around that week 8, week 9 time frame. And I don't think it's a surprise that they decided to go away from Fournette at that time and go towards Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones was becoming pretty quickly their feature back, and Leonard Fournette was just being a healthy scratch week in, week out. And I think people forget that. Then, of course, as we know, Ronald Jones got COVID. He ended up injuring his hand. There were a lot of reasons why playoff Lenny ended up becoming a thing. But you can have Lombardi Lenny all the time. I want regular season Rojo because I just think he's a much better runner.
Couldn't agree more. Let's keep it going here. RB25, you've got Melvin Gordon. Then you've got the rookie Travis Etienne at RB26. Javonte Williams right after Etienne at 27. Raheem Mostert coming up into 28. And then we've got David Johnson coming in at RB29, making the swing here to Mike Davis at RB30. Myles Gaskin coming in at 31. Damian Harris at 32, Michael Carter at 33, James Conner 34, Leonard Fournette, as we mentioned already, 35, Devin Singletary 36, Trey Sermon, the other rookie, at 37, Jamal Williams at 38, Naheem Hines at 39, and wrapping out your top 40, Tony Pollard. Corey, let's move into wide receiver here. Again, another elite tier. Top 4 at the wide receiver position. No arguments here for me. Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, and Stephon Diggs. Then we get into your stud tier. And Corey, I think one of the biggest surprises I saw when I went through your rankings was your wide receiver 5 in Mike Evans, followed up by Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley, Michael Thomas, A.J. Brown, and DK Metcalf rounding out your top 10. Let's go back to Evans at 5, Corey. What puts him all the way up at 5?
Yeah, sure. And I understand how that can kind of be off the beaten path when it comes to Mike Evans being number 5. But keep in mind, 5 through 10 for me, all the names that Justin just went over, you can kind of mix and match. They're all in that stud tier. Let me say this, though, when it comes to Mike Evans, he has sort of always been to me a criminally underrated wide receiver. I think he's a bona fide wide receiver 1. He's got that touchdown appeal that just other guys can't seem to have consistently, but he just does. On top of that, you're looking at a player who was really getting into an offense that found its groove later in the season, and he was benefiting from that. He was a really good wide receiver 1, and I understand it was a little bit of a roller coaster last year, but if that team can gain a little bit of consistency, I think Mike Evans and Chris Godwin can both be really, really good wide receivers, with Evans having the clear advantage because of his touchdown upside. Again, if you want to tell me you'd rather have Keenan Allen or Calvin Ridley, especially with Julio being gone, or Michael Thomas, I'm not going to fight you. I think that's all a good call. But I'm going to take Mike Evans, and I'm going to be happy if I have him, especially in standard leagues.
Let's move into your good tier here, Corey. Starting at wide receiver 11, we've got Justin Jefferson, the second-year wideout. We've then got Amari Cooper, Allen Robinson, Adam Thielen, Julio Jones at wide receiver 15, Robert Woods, Terry McLaurin, Chris Godwin, Kenny Golladay, Deontay Johnson at wide receiver 20, Brandon Cooks, CeeDee Lamb, Cooper Kupp, and then at wide receiver 24, we wrap up this good tier with DJ Moore. Corey, what puts DJ Moore all the way down at the bottom of this tier here for wide receivers?
Sure, yeah, and I don't hate DJ Moore. I like DJ Moore a lot. I'll just say this. Looking at all the names above DJ Moore as we go through this list, I just like all of them a little bit better. Cooper Kupp has had a little more consistency. CeeDee Lamb has that higher ceiling in my mind. Brandon Cooks is really going to be possibly the only option, assuming Deshaun Watson is going to play. Deontay Johnson, I think, has a really, really high ceiling. Reminds me of the CeeDee Lamb ceiling. And again, I can just sort of go through all these names, and I like them a little bit more than I like DJ Moore. He's got a little bit of a messy situation coming into it with a new quarterback and what that might mean. It was a little bit messy last year. You know, people forget the beginning part of the year where he was really second fiddle to Robbie Anderson. And that might be something that you just need to keep your eye on. Now, I have high hopes for DJ Moore, but I'm definitely worried about his floor and sort of how that can impact his fantasy performance this year. I like him. I just like everyone above him a little bit more.
Feel like we've been waiting for that true breakout from DJ Moore. I couldn't agree more, Corey. 4 touchdowns last year, 4 touchdowns in 2019, and then only 2 touchdowns his rookie season in 2018. It does feel like he's a rock-solid wide receiver 2, back-end wide receiver 2, but we've just been waiting for that elite jump here, and it hasn't happened yet. And with the new quarterback there and Sam Darnold under the helm, it's certainly suspicious on if it'll happen this year. I totally get the call. Let's move into your next tier, Corey, and this is the risk tier, going from wide receiver 25 all the way down to wide receiver 40. It starts out with Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, and T. Higgins, all 3 Cincinnati wide receivers clustered there. Then we get Cortland Sutton, T.Y. Hilton, Chase Claypool, Devontae Smith, the rookie for the Philadelphia Eagles. OBJ coming in at 32, Tyler Lockett, Brandon Ayuk, Devontae Parker, Marquise Brown, Jerry Jeudy, Jarvis Landry, Deebo Samuel, and then Curtis Samuel to round out your top 40. I wanted to go back, Corey, to OBJ up at wide receiver 32. Is this a make or break season, Corey, for OBJ? Is this? It feels like now he's definitely at a discount, right? I mean, this was a guy that was being drafted as a top 10, top 5 sort of dynasty wide receiver a couple years ago. Now we have him all the way down in the 30s. This is a make or break year for OBJ.
Well, Justin, think about it, right? I mean, talking about Odell Beckham prior to this year, you could always question his character. You could always question his consistency, but you could never question the talent. Now, because of the injury he's coming off of, I'm going to question if he can still maintain the talent. So this is the lowest I've ever had Odell ranked. I felt sort of gross seeing a name like Odell Beckham Jr. this low, but I think when we look back on Odell's career, it's going to be like what could have been if he had kept his head on straight and at the same time had remained healthy, even just for a good amount of it. I don't hate Beckham if I can stash him on my bench and I have other receivers sort of ahead of him. But otherwise, you said make or break. I think it's just break or break at this point. I mean, it's just I have no more trust. 32 even. I'm going to feel gross taking them even at 32. But a lot of these guys in this category, you call it the risk category, and that's what it is. A lot of them are just, I don't know if you can hear this, Justin, through the microphone, but I'm just shrugging right now. And that's just how I feel with everyone in this whole category from 25 to 40.
Let's move into tight end. Tight end is interesting, as it always is every year. I'm going to walk through the elite tier here first, Corey, for you. You got Kelsey, Kittle, and Waller. Totally agree, right? In any order you want to put them in. Then you've got Kyle Pitts here coming in your next tier, which is a stud tier. And I think it's a good call, right? I think having him at tight end 4 makes a lot of sense, especially with the departure of Julio Jones now. Then we get into your good tier, tight end 5 through 7, Mark Andrews, TJ Hockenson, and Dallas Goedert. I wanted to stop here in your risk tier, which is tight ends 8 through 16. And I wanted to first start with Noah Fant, Corey. What do you like about Noah Fant? Could you see him potentially emerging this year and moving his way into that good tier?
Yeah, Justin, I mean, what I like about Noah Fant here is honestly the fact that Noah Fant, talent-wise, I think needs to be in a whole tier above. I think he's good. I think he's a really good tight end, and I like when I see him play. The side of it is, though, is like, the Denver tight end situation is messy, and I don't really like that whole offense from a pass-catching perspective, at least if I'm talking right now in their messy quarterback situation and just that messy offense as a whole. So when it comes to Noah Fant, I'd love to see him excel at this NFL level. We haven't seen it yet, but if you're looking for a guy who, is still young and is looking for that, tight end year 2, year 3, year 4 jump, Noah Fant's the guy that I would like to do that with. I'll put my chips on him because he's not going to cost you a lot on draft day. But, I really hope I get one of the top 7 tight ends, Justin, because I'm feeling queasy talking about these guys.
It certainly gets a bit messy here. I think you could probably throw any of these tight ends in any order after the top 7. And I think you wouldn't get much argument from most people. So let's keep it going here, Corey. Robert Tonyan at tight end 9, Gesicki at tight end 10, Thomas at 11, Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith come in at 12 and 13. I wanted to ask you, Corey, you've got these New England tight ends back-to-back. What's the reasoning back-to-back here? Is it just that you just really don't know what's going to happen this year with New England?
Yeah, correct, Justin. There's really not much more analysis there. This is close your eyes and throw the dart at the board and see what happens. I don't know. Maybe that short over the middle passing game that Cam Newton would run, or if it's Mac Jones, would benefit these tight ends, and maybe it would be one of them, maybe it would be both of them, and maybe you could really find a number 7 tight end in this offense and a consistent number 7 tight end. Most likely not. That's why they're 12 and 13. But, this whole risk category, like I said before with Fant, is just bleh. That's all I can say.
It's a great way of putting it. Bleh. I like that.
Yeah.
And then 14, 15, 16, you've got Everett, Cook, and Ertz. And then I like your stay away tier after tight end 16, which is just everyone else. And I think that really just personifies the tight end landscape here. Is I think if you're looking for that safe, stable sort of tight end positional weekly production, you want to try to get into that top 7 group, right, which ends up with Dallas Goedert. And I think you're right, Corey. I think it's just stay away from everybody else. Maybe throw some dart throws if you can, but the position itself is just a bit of a mess right now.
Yeah, I couldn't justify, Justin, doing Dallas Goedert and then putting everyone else as just stay away with just no risk category. But there are. If I'm looking for that guy, that Darren Waller, right, who could potentially, jump into the next level. Darren Waller, before he was Darren Waller, was in the risk category for me. He was someone who was considered like a tight end 14, it's someone that's like, hey, if you want to take a shot, it might work out. So that's what I see. Fant, Tanyan, Gesicki, Thomas, Henry Smith, Everett, Cook, Ertz. Those are the guys, right? Those are the guys who you could find that, oh, wow, I have a top 5 tight end and I didn't even realize it. I didn't have to pay for it. Those could be those guys. And everyone else just avoid at all costs.
Avoid at all costs. There we go, man. Awesome. We just went through Corey's fantasy football rankings for the 2021 season. We're going to be back next week, guys. We're starting our weekly shows up here again. We're going to be back with more content as we approach the 2021 NFL season. Remember to check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell on YouTube. Download, follow, like, comment, whatever you have to do to show some support. I'm Justin.
And I'm Corey.
And this has been the 4th and Long Fantasy Football Show. We'll see you next time.
Royalty-free music courtesy of Ben Sound. The views and opinions expressed on today's episode are that of the 4th and Long Fantasy Football Show. Remember to like and subscribe.